Good afternoon, everyone. We all know that fundraising has been challenging in ophthalmology, particularly over the last few years. So I was really delighted when Maureen asked me to put this panel together, and I knew that Jason would be an excellent thought partner and co-moderator in what I know will be a fantastic session today. The goal is for our very esteemed panelists, who are strong supporters and investors in our space, to provide some nuggets of wisdom as we think about fundraising in our community. I'm really grateful to Joe, Anna, to Jeff, and to Zach for coming out to join this panel, and looking very forward to it. With that, maybe let's turn over to introductions. So maybe Jeff, starting with you.
Okay. So I'm Jeff Friedman, very pleased to be part of this panel. Thank Jason and Paul for inviting me. I do a lot of work with companies at the earliest stage, typically seed, pre-seed, work with angel groups, et cetera. My background, I'm not in ophthalmology. I'm trained actually as a pediatric hematologist oncologist, but because of basic science interest, have been fortunate to be an investor and watch several companies in the space develop and be successful.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Chen. I'm a principal on the team at Frazier Life Sciences. I'm a PhD by background, and at Frazier focus on our private side investments as well as company creation efforts, whereby we're spinning out companies around assets that have been either deprioritized or are not taking the front seat at biotechs. I'm on the board of Iconis, which is an ophthalmology company that we created with Zach and the folks at RA earlier this year. And then a little bit about Frazier. We're a dedicated life sciences venture fund. We have $1 billion on the private side and over $1 billion on the public fund. So we invest early to late across therapeutic areas as well as modalities, but obviously do a lot in ophthalmology.
I'm Zach Scheiner, principal on the investment team at RA Capital. RA Capital is a healthcare dedicated fund based in Boston. We invest really across all therapeutic areas, modalities, stages, so from drugs and devices to healthcare services, from company creation all the way to the public markets. I've been with RA for coming up on 10 years. I really work across therapeutic areas as well, but have done a lot of ophthalmology over the years. I think I've been involved in close to a dozen ophthalmology investments since joining RA. Some of the private companies I'm involved with, or when we invested, Ivantis, RxSight, Lens Therapeutics, Sidnexus, and most recently Spyglass and Iconis. So it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Hi everyone, Joe Markson. I'm a principal at Novo Holdings. Novo Holdings is the asset manager for the Novo Nordisk Foundation. It's a controlling shareholder of Novo Nordisk, but Novo Holdings itself functions kind of as a classic venture capitalist, like the other firms up here. Invest across all therapeutic areas, all modalities, all stages, private and public companies. I've been here for about 4 years, a biophysicist by training, and kind of taken an interest in ophthalmology from the beginning. Most recent ophthalmology deal we did on the private side, I think, was Ray Therapeutics with Paul and team. We've also invested in a number of public ophthalmology companies.
Great. And then it's Jason Jun here. I'm with Citi's biopharma banking team based in LA. Been with Citi for the last 3 years and biopharma banking for the last 15. And one of the co-heads leading our biotech banking practice. So, why don't we kick off? Perhaps we can just go around the horn very quickly. Just ask a bit of an open-ended question in terms of, obviously, we have a very ophthalmology-focused audience here, but perhaps we can just start with, the question around what initially attracts you to ophthalmology as an investment, right? I think that's a pretty critical question. And just given that we have a lot of broad investors here investing across the spectrum of the life cycle of companies, perhaps we'll start with the early stage focused investor in Jeff. So perhaps Jeff, in terms of investing in early stage companies, are there any specific tips, guidance, or criteria that you look for when you look at an opportunity in ophthalmology?
Yeah, so I think for me as really as a basic scientist by training, I always start with what the underlying technology is, and I want to have some understanding of, we have to look at everything that you guys do at later stages, but first we have to focus on the idea. Does the idea have biological plausibility? Does it make sense? Does their approach to whatever the problem is they're trying to solve actually have a chance of creating a drug at the end of the line if they're successful? So I would say it's very scientifically focused. There are some inherent, I think if you were here for the previous panel, you heard that there are many firsts in ophthalmology with regards to drug developments and drug modalities. And so, it is a showcase for new technologies, trying them out in a space where you have little systemic exposure to whatever the agent is that you're trying to develop. And so it is kind of unique in that sense.
And I guess, just picking up on your comment about modalities, I know, Zach, you've had some extensive experience in the regen medicine space. Are there any particular modalities that you're sort of more drawn to when you're looking at investments like cell and gene therapy, or you're agnostic to the modality in ophthalmology?
Yeah, I'd say we're more agnostic. We try to take an unbiased approach and look at every company and whether the modality that it's chosen really fits the indication that they're going after. I think we're more interested in the size of the unmet need. Is there a big enough market to support the expensive development costs of long clinical programs? Another question we always ask ourselves is this product ultimately going to be unconscionable to deny? So, in this world we live in, there's outsized role of payers in determining what treatment is right for patients, and it's sort of an unfortunate development, but a reality that we have to live with. And so, we always ask ourselves if could a payer conscionably make a patient step through 2 or 3 generics before getting this treatment? Would anyone blink an eye if that were the case? Or on the other hand, would it create headlines if the media found out about that? We certainly want to invest in the latter and take that reimbursement and payer risk off the table.
That's great. Thanks, Zach. Anna, any thoughts to add? Are there parallels with what Zach mentioned, or anything to add?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, I think for us, because we do a lot of company creation, it's very interesting, right? Ophthalmology actually has a bit of a skew in that the unmet need is very high, and yet some of the companies who might have products that would work for ophthalmology and meet those unmet needs are not focused on it. They're focused on other therapeutic areas and whatnot. And so there's actually a really attractive opportunity for us to really build value, especially with some of the earlier stage assets. I would also say the strategic landscape, I think historically has been challenging, but obviously we're seeing some signs that pharma is interested in ophthalmology again, and some of it is related to kind of peripheral to a lot of the work that's being done in immunology and other fields. But I think there's just kind of an undeniable unmet need that people are starting to see real value in. So for us, it works out pretty well as a field.
Yeah, great. I guess, Joe, I know that you look at a lot of ophthalmology assets. Is there something that you can recommend to companies from a diligence standpoint that's going to be helpful for you when you're going through the process? Like, is there something besides the obvious, obviously being organized with data rooms, et cetera? Would it be like having external KOL support? Is there something that maybe companies can think about that wouldn't be obvious?
Certainly, the obvious things that come to mind: organization of the data room, clarity of the story, clarity of the development path going forward, so that we can really see over time what are the key data value inflection points catalyzed by data. When will those come? what is the route to ultimate registration. Might seem obvious, but a lot of companies don't have that in their pitch, or it's kind of murky. It is certainly very helpful if the company offers to connect us with KOLs. We'll always go out and do our own KOL calls, but it's certainly easiest if the company can just send us over to one or two. Obviously, make sure you align with those KOLs. We've actually had instances where companies referred us to their KOLs, and then the KOLs are tepid on the opportunity. But anything that reduces friction, basically, from KOL connections, a data room where at least the literature in the data room is downloadable. Anything that makes it easier for me to do my job, the less friction there is, the more time I'll spend diligencing your company and not another one where it's easier.
Maybe just on that note, I think we hear from investors that sometimes there needs to be a hook, right? When you decide to, okay, right, we're going to go for this investment. I'm going to bring this to IC and write a big check. I guess I think the audience may find it helpful to perhaps hear about some examples as to what some of those things might have been for some of your investments in the past, right? Were there any specific data sets that you find memorable, certain management teams, or certain moments in time where things really truly made a lot of sense and were very compelling that really clinched that investment? We'd love to hear any examples that the panelists may have here. So perhaps, Joe, anything to add there?
I could just use Ray Therapeutics as an example. I think one thing that helped us a lot, there are several optogenetics companies that have been out there over the past couple of years, and Ray had compiled head-to-head data against competitor channels, showed that to us early on. That really gave us conviction that, in our view, it was best in class, and that combined with a really clear breadth of applicability in like a mutation agnostic manner. It addresses like the market size as well as the competitive landscape all in one. Head-to-head data against competitors, either in development or approved products, I think is super, super helpful. And that is often our hook to do more work.
Thank you. I did not set Joe up for a plug, by the way. But thank you. But what happens, again, for anybody on the panel, if let's say that you pass on an investment, for whatever reason, and somebody's doing another round, is it possible to then recover and come back to you? Have you had that experience, and have you passed and then, taken an opportunity to invest later on?
Almost every time, I think.
Oh, really?
I mean, almost every investment that I've done, I'm sure not everyone, but we've passed at some point prior. So, I think the message to CEOs and management teams is it's never no, it's always not yet. I mean, a great example, we led the Spyglass Series C last year. We had passed on the Series B. They generated more data, and we were happy to pay a higher price for more data. And I think we also had some aha moments, some sort of hooks during that diligence process. So Spyglass, for people who don't know, this is an IOL-mounted drug delivery platform. Could treat a variety of diseases, but the lead is Matopros for glaucoma. Should be able to deliver multiple years of therapy at the time of cataract surgery. And I think initially you think of it as a competitor to MIGS, and you sort of comp to that market. And the hook was, well, only 50% of cataract surgeons do MIGS, and really only 25% of them do a lot of MIGS. So you're immediately, okay, this market is 3 to 4x the MIGS market. And then, not just that, but it's, currently mounted to a basic monofocal IOL. Companies don't make a lot of money on those IOLs, so you're immediately converting 20% of the basic monofocal IOL market to a premium market. Not just a premium like AT-IOL market, but if you look at the iDose price, potentially a ultra premium market. So those were a couple of the hooks, and I'm glad they came back and pitched us again.
The other thing I'll say is when we look at companies who have met with us in the past, coming back to us, I always like to dig up the old pitch deck and look at the plan, the timeline, and match that up to, okay, where did you think you were going to be today versus where you're actually at? And that tells me a lot about the team's ability to, execute on the plans that they laid out. It's not often that we get, folks who hit it exactly, of course, but for the teams that do, it really is like, okay, you guys just said you were going to do this, and you did. And that's a real testament to the team.
Great. And then how about, are there some maybe like common mistakes that any of you see? Jeff, maybe, if you can identify, like, or is there like sort of a running theme, or maybe, because you do a lot of early stage investing, are founders like overly sensitive to dilution, for example, where they have a too high a valuation or an expected valuation, or they don't want to raise too much money at an early stage? Are there mistakes that you see that could be helpful, that people are setting themselves up for success and not to run into those mistakes?
So I think at every stage of investing, it's about the management team building credibility with the investor on the other side of the table. So certainly that happens at the earliest stages when, if you're talking about companies coming back 6 months later or a year later having executed on something that they promised, or looking at their deck and seeing that they're going, 180 degrees from where they thought they were going. I mean, those are really important data points. But coming back to the question of building trust, I mean, founders come in all different flavors. Some, will undersell their technology and their data. Some will tell it straight exactly as it is and let you know everything, and some will oversell it. I think in my experience, what's fatal is overselling your data, and even worse than that, basically creating data that doesn't exist or telling untruths. So, as excited as you are about the potential of your technology, it's really, really important that you communicate the exact actual state of what you have done and where you are. And I think that clear communication is critical for developing trust with an investor at any stage.
Maybe just a related question is, we talked about some of the mistakes to avoid, but perhaps, what are some of the tips for the audience here in terms of what can really drive a successful fundraising process, right? In terms of, is there a certain way to drive momentum, right? What gives you extra conviction that something might be coming together, right? How companies think about leads versus followers, how they think about the size of the raise, right? Sometimes we hear feedback on, you don't want to raise too little, right? You want to have enough capital to fund the main program and the pipeline behind that. So there's a lot of things that go into a successful fundraise, but perhaps we'd love to hear your guys' thoughts as to, what are some of the successful ingredients and what are some of the practical tips that you may have for companies looking to raise right now. And I see you nodding, so I'm going to look to you to go first.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things that are maybe a little bit counterintuitive. One is don't raise too little. Because if you tell me that you're going to raise, a $15 million round and it's going to get you a little bit more data, I'm going to say, all right, I'll wait until you're done with that $15 million and come in at the next round, right? You really want to raise enough to kind of make investors like us feel FOMO, like fear of missing out on this round, because if you guys don't invest in this round, we're going to get to clinical proof of concept, and then we're going to get, acquired or go public or be way more expensive, right? You have to make us feel like, okay, of course, tranche the rounds and whatnot, but just be aware of what the value inflection points that you're raising to, and be very communicative about that with your investors. The other thing is, don't go out too early, and it's difficult to kind of do that just given you have a certain cash runway. But I've heard people say, oh, we're out of cash in 9 months. Let's just go out now and start talking to investors. Like, guys, you're not ready. You don't have the data that's going to get people excited. And we found that companies that sort of go out, 6 months too early end up taking 6 months longer to raise, because that's just, and then you're just distracting your team and dealing with all this hassle that you really don't need to. So figure out where the right point is. before you approach investors, because oftentimes you do kind of get, one shot, at least in this round, before they say, well, you're too early or whatever. Yeah.
That's great advice. I know, Zach, something that came up in our pre-call that I think you felt strongly about that companies were missing was being in tune with the public markets and really forward-looking, even if they're doing like a Series A. How important is it that they're in tune with what's going on the public side?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. I'm probably biased because I spend, roughly half my time looking at public companies and de novo public investments. But I think there are a lot of funds, like ours that do both public and private, and we don't ever want to make an investment that depends on M&A because it's just unpredictable. It's out of your hands. You need multiple bids to get fair value for the company, and so we invest in every company with the expectation that they can IPO and they can build a standalone business. So it needs to be big enough market opportunity to support a standalone business. They need to be clear value inflections that would be attractive to public investors on the other side of an IPO. And so if you as a CEO or management team aren't attuned to what public investors are valuing in ophthalmology companies right now and for the next few years, then it's going to be hard for you to attract our dollars. And so you look right now at the companies that have been really successful in the public markets. You look at a Glaukos, you look at a Tarsus. And just follow those companies and learn from them. And then you can look at, are there any, really successful public, small to mid-cap public dry eye companies? There aren't. It's a vacuum right now. That's turned out to be, a really expensive area to develop and market drugs. It's very crowded. It's sort of the big players are left. So I think you learn a lot following public markets and set yourself up for success in private financings.
And maybe, Zach, just a quick follow-up for you. Across the companies that you meet with, do you think that, for the most part, companies do address this question around positioning relative to public peers, how they think about value creation, investment from a public investor perspective? Do you think that point is well understood and addressed, generally speaking, or is that typically an area where many private companies fall short?
Yeah, I would say the latter. I think it's some companies appreciate it and do it well, and some just put up a list of 20 ophthalmology companies and their market caps, and,
Yep.
or just the 5 biggest ones, even if they're not good comps. So I think there's work to be done there.
Yeah. I think you mentioned in the pre-call, which was interesting, that if private companies made a proactive effort to address this point, it would really make the investors' jobs a lot easier, right, in terms of formulating the thoughts and providing a starting point, which again is interesting. Which I think we touched on a really interesting point around, I think we spoke in the first half of this panel around advice for companies, but I think the other piece of feedback that we get from investors is a lot of companies don't quite understand how investors work, right, from the investor's perspective. So something around understanding, the investment opportunity from an investor's perspective is what we would love to talk about in a little bit more detail. So perhaps, Joel, I'll ask you the question, aside from company fundamentals, right, data, et cetera, what other considerations should companies be very focused on from the investor standpoint? Fund considerations, hold periods, sensitivity dilution, whatever it may be. What are some of those ingredients that, again, will be important for your decision making?
I think in terms of hold period, sensitivity to dilution, you could probably over-engineer your pitch. You probably shouldn't over-index on that. You'll need to go out and speak to a variety of investors, all of whom have somewhat different objectives. It is useful to think about the phenotype of the investor. There are early stage investors, kind of mid stage, and then crossover at late stage. Just be conscious of who you're speaking to and tailor the pitch accordingly. But don't try to fit a square peg into round hole. It's just honestly represent where you are, become somewhat mindful of the type of investments the investor makes, and if there's a match, I think things will happen. And if there's not, I'll remember the pitch, and 2 years down the road when you're at the next value inflection point, be ready to pick back up and reevaluate then.
Right.
So I'll just say, as an investor, and this holds at early stage, I think at any stage, what we're really looking for from a company is a capital efficient plan to answer the question, does their therapeutic modality, work in a human proof of concept? We're looking for the shortest, most efficient way to get to that answer. We love when companies bring in non-dilutive funding. For early stage investors, I think that we have a risk that some of the, let's say, better filled out wallet investors don't have, which is financing risk is critical for us. Our companies need to make it to the next milestone so that they can create the data package that Anna or Zach or Joe would like to, invest the minimum check size that they have for their round, and we would love to take it, but we need to get the company to that stage. So we have a little bit different considerations.
Very helpful. I want to make sure we're covering an important topic before we run out of time, because really the intent here is to give the biotech companies tools. And something I know, Zach, you touched on M&A, but I think it comes up in every company in ophthalmology when they're talking to investors about the very thin landscape of strategics that are making deals in the space. So how do you think that companies can best deal with that question? Obviously, Zach, that was really helpful around understanding the public markets, but it's something that every company is going to have to answer. So maybe Joe, if you can start, and then maybe we can go down the line. Everybody can comment on that, because I think it's a big question that needs to be answered.
It is certainly something that comes up a lot in our investment committee, the perception that there's a limited universe of acquirers, although it's clear that seems to be expanding right now. And it goes to Zach's earlier point about, investors often look to underwrite to an IPO. That's what we always do. You can't rely on M&A. So you need some way to, over the course of the arc of a company's life, to see a route to a public exit. Maybe it requires some more programs, several notches of additional data, but we do need to see a path to an IPO. It's very, very difficult to, you probably should really never pitch yourself as, we're going to get acquired by XYZ unless you've already done like a build to buy deal. That is another route you could take, is one of these build to buy type deals where there's a pre-agreed takeout offer with a potential acquirer. Those are also very attractive to us. They're not that common, but that's a potentially underexplored area.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it's a perception. I think it's a perception that's changing. With Merck getting back in, with the Stellus, and from what I hear from bankers like you, Jason, even more non-ophthalmology players looking at assets. I think hopefully some of those will come through, but we don't worry about it too much. We would love for there to be more strategic acquirers in ophthalmology, but that doesn't keep us from investing in the space because we are willing to continue supporting these companies through the public markets, as long as they keep executing and generating positive data.
Yeah, and for some companies, you just got to be willing to take it all the way, right? Including through an IPO, but even for some of our ophthalmology companies, like we were investors in Tarsus, they're now commercial, right? They have to be willing and able to take on that challenge.
Yeah, so not my forte, but clearly you have significant unmet medical need, and demographics are working in your favor. This is going to continue to be an expanding market over time.
Maybe a quick related question to on the topic of large caps and strategics. Do things change for you in terms of the complexion of the company if there is a meaningful partnership that the company has with part of their pipeline? Does it provide some form of validation for the company or the technology? And I guess fundamentally, does it force a rethink or a relook at a company in the absence of data for you to re-engage? And Joe, I see you nodding, so.
So I think it's yes with an asterisk. Certainly, if you have a partnership with a strategic, I will naturally probably take a closer look at the company, but often I also will have to take a look at the economics. Which program is partnered? If it's a lead program, that can actually be quite problematic for investors. If it's a second or third program, yes, validation, but yes, also potential distraction for management team. So yes, it is validating. It does prompt a closer look, but it is not as much of a it's not always a golden egg.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it's more frequently a negative than a positive. Certainly not black and white and not always negative, but if you partner away economics in your lead program early, you're certainly not getting the value we would see in that down the road. So, those decisions are nuanced and complicated, and there are certainly the right times to partner things. Certainly, ex-US could be a great opportunity to find some dollars, pipeline programs that you don't have the resources to prosecute on, or in markets that would be too large for you to commercialize. But in general, we like our companies to hold on to their assets, keep them wholly owned as long as possible.
Great. Maybe one last question we can squeeze in, because I hear this a lot from biotechs, is that the investors talk about how they're so overwhelmed with deals, and the sentiment is that that their diligence gets pushed down. Is there anything, just sort of last words of wisdom, to keep these deals at the top of the pile? Because I know that you have many that you're looking at the same time. Any advice for companies?
I can start. I was going to say, go out at the right time, as I mentioned earlier, because if you're too early, it's very easy to say, well, they're going to take 6 months to get this thing done, so I'm not going to do it right now. The other piece is, to the extent that you can start to build the relationship with the investors early on, or you can get a warm intro, obviously that helps a lot, because we don't know everything as investors. We trust the folks, our advisors and folks around us. And so, if you can get folks like that involved in the company to be able to introduce you to investors, that's always a good path.
Yeah, I would just add, try to make things as frictionless as possible. We do see a lot of pitch decks and get a lot of emails, and are working on a lot of different companies at the same time. And so, when you reach out to pitch, or someone makes an intro, attach the non-confidential deck. Don't use a DocSend. I'm sorry. I'm sure a lot of people love DocSend, love to track who's opening their deck, but it's really annoying. And I think Joe said some things about data rooms, make as much downloadable as you possibly can. We know there's, if there's sensitive information, you can't possibly allowed, to be downloaded. Restrict that to a few files. Just these little things when you're trying to do diligence on companies, and I'm sure all of you have been in data rooms, and you've got 10 different tabs open, and you get logged out, and you're like, oh my God. And you have to redo all this. You can't find where you were. So all these things sound really inane, but if you make things frictionless, you provide a list of KOLs, as Joe mentioned earlier. Every little thing you can do to make it easier increases the probability we'll get to an answer. It won't necessarily be a yes, but the quicker we can get to an answer, the quicker you can devote your resources elsewhere.
Yeah, to the points made earlier by others, it's not really that often. We get a ton of deals where I'm constantly getting logged out of data rooms, can't remember which one it's open. They're all like DFIN or some common provider, so I don't even know what this tab is about. But it's not very common that a company comes across that with a crisp story, with the right data, a good team, and raising the right amount of capital, maybe extra capital, to get to the next value inflection point with a clear focus. And then frictionless access to all these things that we're talking about. Those stories are less common than you might think, and those ones certainly raise to the top of my inbox.
I would just say, you're hearing that the interaction with the investor is storytelling, and it happens in chapters. And the better your index is, the better chance you're going to have of getting your story across clearly.
Super, super helpful. Thank you all very, very much. Jason, I know that you wanted to just give a big thank you.
I think
to
we're
everyone.
just about on time.
Yeah.
So again, thank you to all our panelists for joining us today. Hopefully it was helpful to hear their thoughts around fundraising and also understanding investments from their perspective, which I think is not too often we hear that. So hopefully it's provided the audience for some food for thought. And we'll just about close here. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.